My fellow Americans, in a world as interconnected as ours, economic strength is not just built on tariffs and threats. It's built on foresight, cooperation, and the courage to invest in the long game. The global economy is not a zero-sum game. It's a complex web of relationships built over decades, rooted in mutual interest and shared prosperity. And when we forget that, we don't just risk losing ground, we risk isolating ourselves from opportunity. A trade war may sound tough. It may make for a catchy headline. But the question we must ask is, who actually pays the price? Is it the rival nation across the ocean, or is it the farmer whose crops go unsold? The factory worker whose job disappears? The small business owner who can't afford rising costs? History tells us that economic nationalism rarely ends in economic growth. It ends in retaliation, stagnation, and uncertainty. Let quotes start with a truth that's often ignored in the heat of political theater. Tariffs are taxes, not on foreign governments, but on American consumers and American businesses. When tariffs are imposed on imports from another country, say steel from China or electronics from Asia, it's not those foreign producers who pay the price. It's American manufacturers who rely on those materials. It's small businesses who can't absorb the higher costs. And it's families who feel the pinch every time they go to the store. The idea behind tariffs is simple enough: raise the cost of foreign goods so that domestic products become more competitive. But in a global economy where supply chains cross oceans and time zones, that theory doesn't hold up so easily. American factories often depend on parts made overseas. American farmers sell crops to markets abroad, and when tariffs go up, retaliation comes next. Suddenly, soybeans sit unsold. Car plants slow production, and prices rise across the board for everything from refrigerators to smartphones. The people who bear the brunt of this strategy aren't political rivals or foreign elites. They're the working Americans who are promised protection but end up caught in the crossfire. The farmer in Iowa, the auto worker in Michigan, the small business owner in Ohio who just saw their supplier raise prices by 20%. These are not collateral damage. These are the very people our policies should be protecting and empowering, not burdening with short-sighted decisions made for political headlines. And here's the thing: those foreign countries we're supposedly punishing, they find other markets. They make new deals. They invest in different partnerships. But our economy, built on decades of global integration and cooperation, becomes less predictable, less stable, and less competitive. When trust is eroded in our trade relationships, it doesn't just hurt them, it undermines us. Tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. They send a message that the United States is retreating, not leading. Leadership in trade requires more than toughness. It requires wisdom. It requires understanding how every lever we pull affects the entire system. Imposing tariffs without a broader strategy is like performing surgery with a hammer. It's blunt, it's messy, and it often does more damage than good. What workers in this country need is not a tariff war. They need an economic plan that builds capacity, attracts investment, and strengthens their position in a changing world. Some will say, well, we have to show strength. We have to play hardball. But strength is not measured by how loudly you shout or how many penalties you impose. It's measured by results. Did wages go up? Did jobs come back? Did businesses expand? Those are the real markers of success. And if the answer to those questions is no, then all the political posturing in the world won't make it a victory. The promise of tariffs is often emotional. It taps into people's real frustration with job loss and wage stagnation. But emotion can't be a substitute for evidence. And the evidence is clear. The longer a trade war drags on, the more it damages the people it claims to help. That's not just bad economics. It's bad leadership. Because the point isn't to win a fight. The point is to win a future where American workers thrive. In an era defined by global interdependence, the most successful strategies are not those that seek to isolate a nation, but those that position it to lead through cooperation. Economic strength today isn't measured solely by how many goods we produce within our borders, but by how effectively we partner across them. The world is not standing still. Countries are aligning, trading, and advancing together. The question isn't whether we join the table, it's whether we lead it. Too often there's a tendency to treat international cooperation as weakness, as if engaging with others somehow diminishes our power. But history has shown the opposite to be true. When we bring allies to the table, we multiply our leverage. When we help shape the rules of the global economy, we ensure that those rules reflect our values: fair labor, environmental protections, intellectual property rights. That's not surrender, that's strategy. And it's the kind of strategy that endures. Think about the trade deals we once led. Agreements that opened up new markets for American workers and businesses. Deals that raised standards, set clear expectations, and gave us a seat at the head of the global table. Were they perfect? No. But they were a far cry better than walking away and letting others, who may not share our values, write the rules instead. Because make no mistake, if we don't lead, someone else will. And when we isolate ourselves, we create a vacuum that competitors are eager to fill. Nowhere is this clearer than in the economic relationship with China. We can't ignore the challenges: unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, the lack of reciprocal access. Those are real concerns, and they demand a firm response. But isolating ourselves from global partners while confronting such a giant is not a show of strength. It's a strategic misstep. By alienating traditional allies, we weaken the united front necessary to hold bad actors accountable. And that makes it harder, not easier, to secure fair outcomes. Global cooperation doesn't mean giving up our interests. It means advancing them in concert with others. It means forging coalitions, setting standards, and using our influence to create a system that's more just and more favorable to our workers and businesses. When we act together with Europe, with Japan, with emerging economies, we don't have to choose between being tough and being smart. We can be both. When leaders ignore the value of cooperation, they often fall back on unilateral moves that may look bold but lack staying power. Tariffs launched without consultation, agreements torn up without replacement, alliances dismissed as burdens rather than assets. These are not the marks of a forward-thinking economic strategy. They are reactive gestures, emotional, short-term, and ultimately self-defeating. And they signal to the world not leadership, but withdrawal. What we need now is not bravado, but balance. Not slogans, but solutions. A smart economic strategy understands that the world's challenges are shared, and that solving them requires more than one nation acting alone. Global cooperation isn't charity, it's leverage, it's diplomacy. And most of all, it's leadership. Because in a global economy, real power doesn't come from building walls. It comes from building bridges. Leadership, at its core, is not about capturing the moment. It's about shaping the future. In an age where headlines change by the hour and social media rewards the loudest voices, there's a temptation for leaders to chase applause instead of outcome. But governing a nation, guiding its economy, and protecting its people require more than performative strength. They require patience, they require planning, and above all, they require the ability to look beyond the next news cycle and toward the next generation. Too many economic decisions today are made with one eye on the cameras and the other on poll numbers. And while that may produce sound bites that excite the base or stir controversy, it doesn't lay a foundation for sustainable growth. Temporary victories, built on shaky ground, collapse the moment the spotlight fades. Real leadership isn't about looking strong in the moment. It's about being wise in the moments that follow, because the job isn't just to react, it's to anticipate. Consider the nature of a trade war. It may deliver a burst of nationalist pride. It may energize a rally. But what happens when businesses stop investing because they can't predict what comes next? What happens when consumers pull back because prices go up? What happens when our farmers and manufacturers are caught in the middle of retaliatory measures? These are not distant hypotheticals. They are consequences predictable, measurable, and avoidable. The truth is, economies don't turn on a dime. They respond to certainty, stability, and vision. A long-term economic strategy requires clarity of purpose and consistency of policy. It demands that we resist the urge to politicize every decision and instead root our approach in data, in consultation, and in what history has shown to work. Leadership that constantly lurches from one position to another for short-term approval ends up creating more chaos than confidence. Long-term vision also means investing where it matters most: education, innovation, infrastructure, clean energy. These are the engines of tomorrow's economy, and they don't come with quick returns. But they do build resilience. They create jobs that last. They ensure that American workers are not just protected, but empowered. It may not grab headlines in the same way a tariff announcement does, but over time it delivers far more value to the American people. Leaders with long-term vision understand that prosperity is a process. They recognize that building an economy that works for everyone takes more than one term, more than one administration. They resist the seduction of gimmicks and instead embrace the discipline of real governance. They understand that the health of an economy cannot be measured by the stock market alone or by who wins a trade skirmish. It's measured by the quality of life of everyday people, by the strength of our institutions, and by the opportunities we leave for our children. And let's be clear, this isn't about avoiding tough decisions. Visionary leadership doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means knowing which conflicts are worth having. It means choosing battles that build rather than destroy. That requires humility, maturity, and a deep commitment to something bigger than oneself. In the end, history doesn't remember who shouted the loudest. It remembers who built something that lasted. For a nation to stay competitive in a global economy, the most important investment it can make is not in confrontation, but in itself. Our strength has never come from fear of others rising. It has always come from our ability to rise higher through innovation, education, and opportunity. Trade policy alone doesn't determine our destiny. What ultimately determines whether we lead or fall behind is how well we prepare our people, our businesses, and our institutions for the future. It starts with education. We can't outcompete the world if we're not educating our children to think critically, adapt quickly, and lead fearlessly. While other countries are doubling down on science, technology, and research, we should be making sure every student in America, regardless of zip code, has access to world-class instruction. It's not just a moral issue, it's an economic imperative. Because in the 21st century, talent will be the true currency of power. Next, we need to invest in infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, but broadband, clean energy grids, and high-speed transit. These are not luxuries. They are the backbone of modern commerce. If we want businesses to grow, if we want rural communities to thrive, we must build a foundation strong enough to carry the weight of tomorrow's economy. Every delay in upgrading what's broken costs us jobs, efficiency, and credibility. And of course, we must lead in innovation. That means doubling down on research and development, supporting emerging industries, and creating an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive. Competing with China or any other rising power won't be achieved through punitive measures alone. It will be won by creating new industries, developing cleaner technologies, and embracing the kind of bold ideas that have always set America apart. We should be asking, what are we doing to support small businesses that are trying to get off the ground? How are we helping manufacturers modernize their operations so they can compete globally? Are we making it easier for American goods to be exported, or harder? Too often we treat economic competition as if it's only about tearing others down. But if we're not building ourselves up at the same time, then we're just spinning our wheels. When we invest in workers through training programs, apprenticeships, and workforce development, we give people the tools to adapt and succeed. Automation and globalization are real forces. But the answer is not to run from them or blame others. The answer is to prepare our citizens to thrive within them. That's how we create resilience, not by walling off the world, but by preparing our people to lead in it. The truth is, the nations that win the future will be the ones that bet on their people, not just their politics. That's the lesson we've learned time and again. And if we want to remain a beacon of economic leadership, we must remember that the most strategic move we can make isn't punishing someone else for their success. It's recommitting ourselves to our own. In difficult times, it's natural for leaders to speak to people's emotions. When factories close, when wages stagnate, when families feel squeezed by the cost of living, there is real anger, real frustration, and real fear. And it's the responsibility of leadership to acknowledge those emotions, to speak to them with honesty and empathy. But while emotion can ignite a movement, it cannot run a country. It's not enough to tap into people's pain. You have to offer a plan that leads them out of it. We've seen the rise of emotional leadership, leaders who govern not through policy, but through performance. They offer simple answers to complex problems. They rally crowds with dramatic declarations. They define success not by what gets done, but by how loudly it's said. But governing isn't a performance. It's a responsibility. And in the realm of economics, especially on the global stage, there's no substitute for planning. Real, thoughtful, evidence-based planning. When a leader uses trade policy to provoke rather than to solve, it may generate applause in the short term, but it rarely results in outcomes that benefit working families. Emotional leadership might feel good in the moment, announcing a new tariff, blaming another country for economic woes, but those moves don't always stand up to scrutiny. Markets react, investors pull back, supply chains falter, and the same communities being rallied in the name of protection end up paying the price. Sound economic planning requires more than slogans. It demands data, dialogue, and discipline. It means sitting down with economists, trade experts, labor leaders, and business owners to understand not just where the pain is, but how to fix it. It means modeling the consequences of each move, asking hard questions, and being willing to change course if reality doesn't match the rhetoric. Emotion may start the engine, but it's planning that keeps the vehicle on the road. We should ask ourselves, what happens after the press conference, after the rally, after the announcement? Was there a strategy in place? Was there coordination with allies? Were businesses consulted? Was the long-term cost weighed against the short-term satisfaction? All too often we find that beneath the emotional appeal, there's no plan to follow. And when that happens, the damage is real. Confidence erodes, uncertainty grows, and the economy slows. There's a big difference between channeling the voice of the people and weaponizing it. Leaders have a duty to reflect their citizens' concerns, but they also have a duty to guide, to educate, and to elevate the conversation. They must be willing to make hard choices, even if they're not always popular. That's where integrity comes in. That's where maturity matters. Because leadership isn't about echoing pain. It's about offering a path to healing and strength. When we allow emotion to overtake reason in matters of economic policy, we risk shortchanging our future. The global economy doesn't respond to theatrics. It responds to stability, strategy, and seriousness. And if we want to remain a competitive force in that economy, we need leaders who don't just speak from the heart, but lead with the mind. There's a popular misconception that trade wars can be won like traditional wars, with one side emerging victorious and the other defeated. But that's not how global economics works. In a trade war, there are no parades, no surrender ceremonies, only economic consequences that ripple through supply chains, industries, and communities. Trade wars are not waged with tanks and troops, but with tariffs and retaliation. And in the end, it's not governments that pay the price. It's consumers, farmers, workers, and small business owners who bear the real burden. When a country imposes tariffs on imports, the cost of those goods doesn't magically disappear. It gets passed on. Prices rise. American families feel it at the checkout line in the price of cars, clothes, electronics, groceries. And when other countries respond in kind, as they always do, our exporters suffer. Farmers find fewer markets for their crops. Manufacturers lose foreign buyers. Jobs that depend on trade start to vanish. This is not theoretical. It's what happens every single time these battles are fought without a clear and coordinated strategy. Some may argue that tough trade actions show strength, that standing up to unfair practices requires bold moves. And yes, we should hold our trading partners accountable when they cheat the system. But strength without strategy is reckless. A sudden tariff here, a punitive measure there, with no broader vision, doesn't make us stronger. It just makes the system more chaotic. And in chaos, it's often the small and mid-sized businesses, the backbone of our economy, that suffer the most. The irony is that even when these actions are aimed at helping American workers, they often hurt them instead. When a factory loses access to affordable steel, it may scale back operations or lay off employees. When a farmer sees soybean prices collapse due to retaliatory tariffs, there's no press conference that can make that loss go away. That's why trade wars aren't won. They are absorbed quietly, painfully, across rural towns, urban centers, and everything in between. True economic strength comes not from stoking conflict, but from building leverage through alliances, setting fair standards, and ensuring the playing field is level, not by making it smaller. We don't need to bully the world into trade deals. We need to lead the world into them with clear principles and firm expectations. That's how we ensure trade works for us, not just for the wealthy or the well-connected, but for everyone. Trade policy isn't a game of one-upmanship. It's about creating sustainable advantages, protecting workers while keeping markets open, and using smart enforcement to ensure everyone plays by the rules. When done right, trade builds, not breaks. It creates jobs, spurs innovation, and raises the quality of life. But when weaponized without foresight, it becomes a drag on growth, a drain on trust, and a self-inflicted wound. So we should be asking, who really pays for these so-called trade victories? And what are we gaining in return? Are we building a better future or just burning bridges in the present? Because if we're not careful, the only thing we'll be left with is a sense of pride and a much higher bill. There's a narrative that's become increasingly common in some circles that working with other nations, compromising or engaging in diplomacy is somehow a sign of weakness. That if we're not demanding, dominating, or dictating the terms of engagement, we're somehow falling behind. But the truth is quite the opposite. In today's interconnected world, global cooperation is not a liability. It is a form of leverage. It multiplies our influence, extends our reach, and strengthens our ability to shape the future on our terms. When we work with allies, we amplify our power. Think about the global economy. No major trade challenge can be addressed in isolation. If one country violates intellectual property rules or floods markets with unfair subsidies, a unified response from multiple democratic nations carries far more weight than one nation acting alone. When we stand together with our partners, when we coordinate sanctions, align regulations, and share intelligence, we become more than the sum of our parts. We become a force that others can't easily ignore or outmaneuver. Consider climate change, cybersecurity, or supply chain stability. Challenges that don't respect borders. These are not issues that can be resolved with bluster or bravado. They require collaboration, trust, and long-term commitment. It's in these quiet, behind-the-scenes partnerships where real progress happens. The ability to sit across the table from another country not as an adversary but as a respected peer, and forge agreements that work for both sides. That's where strength shows up. There's also a strategic dimension. When we turn away from global cooperation, we create a vacuum, and someone will fill it. If we pull back from international institutions or alliances, we don't just remove ourselves, we create space for others to rewrite the rules. That's how influence slips. Not with a bang, but with silence. True leadership means being present. It means being engaged. It means building coalitions not just because it's good politics, but because it's smart strategy. And let's be clear, cooperation doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean we agree to terms that hurt American workers or accept deals that are unfair. It means we negotiate from a position of strength, rooted in our values, backed by our allies, informed by fact. It means understanding that diplomacy isn't about pleasing others. It's about advancing our interests through persuasion and principle, not coercion and chaos. Some may scoff at international summits or multilateral agreements, arguing that they tie our hands. But more often than not, those agreements are the very tools that allow us to hold others accountable, to stabilize markets, and to resolve disputes without escalating them into crises. They are instruments of discipline, and when we abandon them, we don't gain freedom. We lose influence. So the question isn't whether we can stand alone. Of course we can. The question is, why would we choose to? Why forfeit the strength that comes from shared values, mutual respect, and collective action? Why retreat when we have every opportunity to lead, not just by example, but by engagement? So the question before us isn't simply about one man, one policy, or one moment in time. It's about what kind of country we want to be and what kind of role we want to play in the world. Do we lead with wisdom or chase headlines? Do we build alliances or burn bridges? Do we invest in our people and our future? Or do we settle for short-term wins that come at long-term costs? History has taught us that America leads best when it listens more than it shouts, when it partners more than it isolates, when it plans more than it reacts. We've always been at our strongest not by standing apart, but by standing with others, anchored by values, guided by strategy, and powered by the belief that leadership means thinking beyond tomorrow. This isn't just about trade. It's about trust. It's about restoring confidence in our economic decisions, in our global standing, and in our commitment to doing what's right, not just what's loud. Because our strength as a nation is measured not by the size of our bravado, but by the soundness of our judgment. In this defining chapter, let's choose maturity over impulse, planning over posturing, partnership over provocation. Let's remember that our greatest victories have never come from retreating inward, but from reaching outward, lifting others as we climb, and writing rules that reflect our highest ideals. That's how we compete. That's how we lead. And that's how we win. Not just a trade war, but a future worthy of the next generation.